Joe Keske, welcome to Sketching Encounters.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's an honor to have you
Well,
here. As I told you a minute ago, I just was sitting here thinking about the journey um, that that you and I have been on just since we met. Has been fabulous and exciting, and I am so excited for you to share not only the Sasquatch stuff, but you have a whole lot of other things to share with this audience, and we may end
there's
up
been a lot
doing
going on.
we may end up doing a part one and a part two for like all of the amazing stuff, like especially like the stuff you sent me yesterday. Oh my gosh. Um, I
Yeah,
mean, what do you
yeah.
do with
Well, that's the stuff that through, you and I interacting, and it's weird because documenting things is part of a habit of my job in construction. Always even just something as simple as daily reports. But when something significant happens on a job site, I'm always recording it. When I was in the military, you had to take records, and and then when you and I had talked when we were doing my sketch back in 2016 or 2017, whenever it was, and you started telling me about you should really start writing the experiences down that you remember prior to and anything new, even no matter if it's just weird, if it's
yeah.
odd, if you think it makes sense, if it doesn't make sense, but you can put it chronologically and the people involved. And I'm like, that's not a bad idea. And when I started doing that, it was like the floodgates opened. I was like, oh, things that you didn't think were relevant all of a sudden are coming back into your memory banks. And when you write them down, you do start to see patterns in things.
Mhm.
And I know, the big event that we'll obviously kick off with tonight is this sketch of my encounter in 95. But, you know, for so many years, I thought that was the beginning. And then I come to find out, like, oh no, that was probably like the midpoint. There was stuff happening prior, stuff happening after that you never really put the pieces together because that thing was so profound.
Right. Yeah, that was profound. Please
Um,
tell them a little bit about you.
yeah, Joe Keske. I'm from Northeast Ohio, halfway between Cleveland and Akron, Ohio. And I live right on the border of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And 51 years old, uh, been married 21 years, got a 20-year-old son and a 17-year-old son. And they've had some encounters too a little bit later on in life here. But I grew up in Independence, Ohio, graduated in 92. And, in school, I was a I was one of the gearheads and adrenaline junkie, I guess you could call it. The what I liked to do in school was work on my truck. I was always into building model cars, building RC cars, racing RC cars. I was never into like, typical sports like football and baseball and all that. I didn't like any of that. I was the kid that was always into the monster trucks and all these kinds of things. And then in high school, going to concerts. And that was it for a long time, just hanging out with my buddies that were, like-minded. They were either the gearheads or the musicians. But one of the things that we started to like to do around 10th grade was we joined it was a biology club in school. We had a wonderful teacher named Mr. Taylor, and he would always take us out on field trips. A lot of times they were Saturday field trips, but they would be during the school year, during school days, and lots of night hikes. And he was very adept at calling in owls. So we would do lots of like field trips. We had a local area in Independence called the Land Lab that we used to go down and take night hikes. And he taught us all how to call owls. And we all got pretty good at it because there was a lot of barred owls and everything in the area. So once everybody got their driver's license, my buddies that were, I guess you could say, the more adventurous in us, we used to go down into the Cuyahoga Valley by ourselves. And back in 1990 to 92, it was called the CVNRA. It wasn't the national park yet. It was the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area. And it wasn't like it is today. You hear people talk about Helltown, and there's documentaries and things about Helltown, and a lot of YouTubers or whatever, they talk about, Stanford Road and Helltown and the barn and all this kind of stuff. Well, for those of us that grew up here, Helltown was basically just considered the entire valley because what had happened was something called the 99-year lease, where there was a lot of houses down there that were taken by eminent domain. My family had a house taken too many, many years prior to this, but our family farm, my great grandfather's farm, was taken by eminent domain to build one of the military's Nike missile sites. And it's funny because that property is now the land lab that I was talking about, where we would go owl calling. That used to be our family's property. And but we always just considered the whole valley Helltown. So if you ever hear me refer to it as that, that went from from Independence to Akron, anywhere where the houses were taken, it's just kind of what we referred to it as. And when these houses were abandoned and you're in high school, well, you might go hiking one day and you get into one because they're not locked up. You're like, this is pretty cool, this urban exploring. Then you start doing it at night, and it's even better. And that's what we would do for fun. We would go hiking at night. We go owl calling. We go into these houses and just poking around. And we were never the ones like vandalizing or nothing. We were too scared to get in trouble. But we go back there all the time, and it was a lot of fun. And in 92, I graduated. I joined the Army and did my basic at Fort Jackson, AIT at Fort Lee, and I did a year at Fort Carson, Colorado. And in March of 94, I was really enjoying my military career a lot. I was making rank very fast. I was stationed in Vilseck, Germany, and I had gotten asked, and this is going to kind of play in. I was thinking about this the other day about bringing this up because it kind of plays in on this whole Sasquatch thing. I was uh I was one of those really gung ho young soldiers that took pride in the way I looked, you know, lean and mean, cocky, not how I was in high school. The Army put that into your head. And I was really enjoying my time in the military. And when I got to my duty station in Germany, my first sergeant kind of recognized that I had wanted to make a career out of this. And he offered me a position to be the driver for the battalion sergeant major. And initially, I thought that was lame. And I'm like, no, I like doing what I'm doing. I don't want to go drive the old man around. But he explained, he's like, that's going to open so many doors for you. You'll meet so many people. You get to travel all over the country. And I'm like, okay, I'll try it. So I became the driver for the battalion sergeant major, and we hit it off, and he was a really nice guy. But one of the odd things that happened when I first did that, and this is kind of where I wanted to make this point that I don't think I've ever talked about before. Within probably the first week of me being the sergeant major's driver, the the E6 in charge of our barracks got busted selling hash. So there was like a drug bust in our barracks, and he lived on my floor. And when the military police came in, they brought the dogs through the barracks. I mean, they went through everybody's room. They interrogated everybody. They're telling people we're going to be giving you guys polygraphs. So and so saw you at a party, said that you could get stuff for them. I mean, they're talking all this stuff, and you're kind of like really scared, like what the hell's going on? I had nothing to do with this. Then we come to find out, it was the building manager that got busted. Well, with me being the sergeant major's driver, I was witness to a lot of what happened to him. The MPs taking him, having to process him into the jail facility, seeing an E6 get busted down to an E1. And I really got to see firsthand what happens when somebody's military career goes awry.
Hmm.
And it was not pretty, you know, but that passed and everything moved on, and it was great. And so in 1995, it was late June, mid June 95. I come home on leave for my sister's graduation party. And I was home for a month. And a couple weeks into me being home on leave, we're having the graduation party, and we get a phone call that one of my uncles, 42 years old, who was in the Coast Guard Reserve, as my Uncle Mitch, died suddenly while he was doing his weekend military training with his reserve unit. He died of a heart attack while he was running. So that put like a real damper on the party atmosphere, obviously, because now, half the family didn't show up to the graduation party. They're with my aunt. They're helping to plan a funeral, and all those proceedings go on, and we have the funeral. And this is getting close to the time now where I've got to go back to Germany. We're probably within like maybe 4 days or so of me having to go back overseas. And my cousin Ken was with me, and one of my buddies, from high school, who I should have messaged him. We'll get to that later, and just to see if I could use his name. I'm sure he wouldn't care. Um, but without knowing, maybe I'll talk about him more in the next one.
Okay.
So, but it was, my buddy, he and I were great friends since grade school, and probably considered best friends all through high school. And every time I would come home from the army, he was it. If there was a guy who I probably would have asked to be my best man at my wedding, it would have been him. So we're hanging out. We go to the fireworks because my cousin Ken asks me, he's like, "Hey, can I spend a couple days with you before you go back to Germany?" And Kenny was always like the little brother I never had. He was 7 years younger than me. And, we would always tell him about, all going down to Helltown and, and all the like spooky things that would happen down there and everything. And he always wanted to go. So we go to the fireworks in Independence. And afterwards, we're looking around like, what are we going to do with Ken? And I get the idea, let's take Ken down to Helltown. So we we walk back to my house, jump in my mom's car, boogie it down to the Cuyahoga Valley, and the first place we're going to take them was a spot that I guess where the barn and everything is that people talk about, and it was a thing called the Edge of the World. And we start coming down the road, and a police officer is coming the opposite direction down the road and turns on that spotlight on his pillar, and he's like blinding us in the car. Well, he didn't turn on his red and blue lights. So, being a cocky 21-year-old, I'm just like, well, he's not pulling me over. I'm going to keep going. So I keep going, get up to the top of the hill. They got the road blocked. And we're like, huh, that must be why he's here. They blocked the road that would go to Brandywine Falls. So we flip a U-turn. We come back down the hill, head out the way we came. And the police officer had turned around also, met us in the same spot, and did the same thing. Turn that light on again. He's kind of blinding us. We pass each other really slow. I can't even see him because the light's so bright in my face. But I keep going, and he stays parked. And so we're like, okay, well, I guess that's kind of a bust. Why don't we go to one of the houses that we would always poke around in? So we go over. It's by Boston Mills Ski Resort. We parked in their overflow lot and went walking into the woods where there's this house, and get into the woods. And in that 3-year period from the time I had left home, that house had gotten demolished. So it was just an open field. So we're crap, strike two. What are we going to do now? So we decide that we're going to go hiking the railroad tracks. And we'll go hike the railroad tracks, and then we'll go home and watch a movie. So this story's been out there enough. I guess I don't really mind telling, where it happened. It's easy to look up. It's on the BFRO page, but it's at Riverview and Vaughan Road. It's called the Jate Trail. And we parked at the Jate Trailhead and jumped out of the car, got onto the tracks, and just started walking. And for people, just to kind of help visualize what's going on here, the train tracks, it's part of the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, CVSR. And, it's still in operation today, but it's just a scenic railroad where families can jump on, go for a train ride down through the valley and take pictures. And they've got meals and stuff that you can do and all that fun stuff. But the train tracks run north and south. As we were walking north on the tracks, the Cuyahoga River is to our right, and it's going north and south. And you've got Riverview Road to my left, and it's also going north and south. So you've got three three things going north and south in parallel, and we're in the middle. And it's a very secluded area, even though this whole valley is surrounded by suburbs. I mean, you've got Cleveland to the north and Akron to the south, and suburbs all around. The Cuyahoga Valley is like 27 or 29,000 acres, um, and abandoned houses now, and old farms and things like that that are down there. So there's really it's a gem in our area that between the national park and the metro parks, these are all tied together. It's pretty remote for being surrounded by people.
Hmm.
So, we're just walking down the tracks and we get,
Are
I don't
y'all
know.
are y'all
I
talking? Are y'all
Yeah,
talking or are y'all laughing and being
yeah,
noisy?
we're just talking. We're just hiking down the tracks talking. Like the spooky things that we had wanted to do, going to Helltown or whatever, that kind of got blown out of the water with the cops. So we're just walking the tracks. And Aaron and I are just, we're walking ahead, and Kenny's kind of tagging along behind us. And me and Aaron are just, we're talking. The three of us are kind of talking, but more me and Aaron. And we're walking down the tracks, and it's, there's trees right there where we enter by the parking lot. But as soon as you get a couple 100 feet in between, to our left, in between Riverview and the tracks, um, back in the 90s was this huge swamp. It was probably a quarter of a mile long from end to end, the swampy, marshy area.
Mhm.
And from the tracks to the road was, probably, I don't know, 100 yards, 200 yards. It's pretty far. So we're uh we're walking, and we've got this marsh to our left, and it's your typical summer night. I mean, you've got the crickets and the bugs and the frogs and everything making noise, and it was warm, and the moon was out, and we didn't have any flashlights, but you didn't even need them. I mean, you could see like it was daylight.
Wow.
And we're walking, and we hear this howl that comes and echoes through the valley, and it was like nothing we had ever heard. And it really kind of took me in particular aback, because of all the time that we had spent down there in the valley with uh with my buddy who used to go hunting with his dad. He was really familiar with wildlife. I wasn't per se an outdoorsman, even though I liked it outside. But everything that we did with the biology club, never heard anything like this, never heard our teacher talk about anything like this. But this howl, it's very reminiscent to what people talk about the Ohio howl. And it came from the left. It came from further across Riverview. It would go up this really steep hill to like the ridge line, the top of the valley. And whatever it was called, the woo, just keeps getting higher and higher. But down in that valley on the 4th of July where it's empty, it echoed. I mean, it just echoed through that valley, and it was so loud. And me and Aaron are just looking at each other, and we're like, what the hell was that noise? And I just remember talking, and he and I are like, we called out. I know that wasn't a coyote. I know that wasn't a rabbit or anything getting killed. And I remember he and I talking about, could this have possibly been a peacock or something like that? And so we keep on walking. We get all the way through the swampy area, and we get to where there's we always kind of called it the tunnel. But the what it was is it was where the tree canopy came back. And there was a bunch of train cars that are parked in this tree canopy area. So you get out of the wide open swampy area, and you get back into this dense, deep forest. It's really, really dark. And I jump up on these train cars that are just, parked off to the side on the separate track. And the other guys are down there, and I'm just poking around, trying to open doors. Everything's locked. And they're like, let's go back, let's watch a movie. I'm like, all right, that's fine. So I jump back down. We're back on the train tracks, and now we're heading southbound again towards my mom's car.
What
And
time do you think it is?
well, I want to say that I figured this was probably around midnight by this time because
Okay.
the fireworks started at 10 that we saw. So by the time the fireworks were over, it was probably 11 o'clock by the time we headed to the valley. And by the time we farted around and got everything done, it was probably close to midnight. So this could have been July 4th, July 5th. It was, right around the midnight time frame.
Yeah.
And so we're heading back towards the car. And again, we get about, maybe just a couple 100 feet into the swampy area. And that's when something screamed that literally the scream was so stunning and so powerful that it just froze you dead in your tracks. And this scream has been like one of the hardest things for me to ever describe because it was so stunning, it was so loud, it was so complex that it started as a shriek. It was a very high-pitched shrieking scream, and it ended as if like a lion roar, like a very guttural, but there was something going on in between where this thing had like transitioned from like this screeching wail to a guttural roar. And I just for anybody who is into motorsports racing, been to a parade with a fire truck, when something is so loud that it actually makes your eardrum itch. That's what happened to me. I got, my cousin and my buddy standing to the left of me and I'm to the right. And this thing is screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming. And I just remember being frozen and staring into the swamp and not seeing anything. The only thing I'm encountering is this screaming coming out of the swamp and my eardrum vibrating and like I'm involuntarily like I got my finger in my ear like this because it's
Hmm.
it's like it's almost painful, the volume, and it's only here. And it ends with this guttural, uh just lungs emptying.
Wow.
And we're just standing there like absolutely like frozen. And my buddy starts to come unglued, and the three of us are standing in a like a triangular formation, and I just remember him just grabbing onto my shoulder and that high pitch like Joe. He's like, what the fuck was that, what the fuck was that, and he's losing his mind screaming in my ear. And as he starts screaming, it's like 25 yards out in the water. It looked like a tree stump had just exploded up out of the water. And this thing, it blows out like this with its arms, and it's an instant charge forward. And where we're standing on these tracks, we're elevated from the water. So we're elevated 4 or 5 feet from the water. It rolls down, and there's like that big number one limestone that goes down and that hits this cattails, and it's just going out into this swamp. And all of a sudden, 75 feet away from me, it's something that's upright on two legs, and it's like I always just said, it looks like it's throwing just wild roundhouse punches, just throwing its arms like this. As it's lunging through the water, it's throwing its weight through the water. And we see this massive creature on two legs like a human come charging through the water right at us. And this thing is coming out of the water so fast that it's like you had a chain hooked to a four-wheel drive truck, and you just romped the gas and you were dragging it as you were running. I mean,
Mm.
this thing was coming through the water so fast, and it was coming right at me. And in an instant, from what I remember, I don't know how the three of us didn't trip over each other, because it was like the snap of a finger. The three of us bolt and take off. And my cousin and my buddy are flying. They are running ahead of me. You know, Ken had just turned 15 and he was a soccer player. My buddy should have been a track star, but he wasn't on, he didn't do sports either. And here I am in the best shape of my life, 21 years old, active duty Army, and these two are smoking me. And I'm running as fast as I can on the tracks. And I just keep looking because this thing had gained so much ground on us that you can't think in the moment, but
Mhm.
it got so close that it felt like that thing was going to reach and grab me by the collar. Like that's how fast this thing gained on us. And it I've described before, but I don't think it's accurate that as fast as we took off running on land, that's how fast that thing came through the water. But I really think it either got a bigger jump on us than I thought because it closed the gap fast and came right at us. And I'm focusing on not tripping because I'm like a full on sprint on railroad ties. And I'm just like going into this loop of looking at the tracks, looking behind me, looking at the tracks, looking behind me, and I see this creature come out of the water and stand essentially right where I was. And it didn't come up onto the tracks, but it stayed right where the gravel and the cattails met. And when it stood, it came to the tracks and it stood and it faced us like facing down the tracks. And and as the army guy, it looked like a soldier at the position of attention. Its arms were down to its side, and it stood and it like locked up like a statue. And the the profile silhouette that I saw was like that of a football player in the shoulder pads. So the shoulders, have got to be 3 to 4 feet wide. But this thing was all biological. You could see all of the muscle definition, everything in the moonlight, the moon, because the thing was wet.
Yeah.
So it didn't look hairy to me. It looked like a naked guy came out of the water that was just absolutely enormous, and all of the proportions were just wrong. I mean, you could see that the shoulders were that wide, but it was all muscle. You could see its pec muscles, its abs, its thigh muscles, everything. And I know one of the things that you and I had tried to deal with was trying to find the face,
Mhm.
and I could never picture the face. The face was always black.
Mhm.
And I never knew if that was some kind of a mental block or if I just truly didn't see it because I have like this sharp image detail of that thing standing there. And we're sprinting back to the car as fast as we can. And I keep looking over my shoulder. And every time I'm looking over my shoulder, it's so big, even you're talking getting, a quarter to 3/8 of a mile away from where this thing's at, and you could still see it standing there. It didn't move. So we get to the car and it's like full on panic. I've always carried like that janitor's key ring for some reason. I got every key in the world on it. And my buddy's on the other side of the car and he's smacking the roof and he's just like, Joe, he's like, open the door, open the door, open the door. Ken is freaking out. He's hyperventilating and he's on this loop of just going, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. And he's just back and forth, and he's crying. My hands are shaking so bad I can't get the key in the lock. I'm dropping the keys. These guys are screaming at me. I finally get the keys in the lock, get the doors unlocked. Ken's still screaming in the back seat. Gets into the front seat, and he's not even sitting like a normal person. He's sitting sideways, like in the seat, like facing at me as I'm trying to back up. And he's screaming at me, Joe, what the hell was that thing? What the hell was that thing? And he's like, he's freaking out. And we're all freaking out. I pull out of the parking lot. And as soon as you pull out of the parking lot, you make a right hand turn out of the parking lot, you dead end into Riverview Road. Well, to turn right, that's how I got to get home. And that's where this creature's at.
Mhm.
And it was like this instinct took over that I didn't even stop at the stop sign and I didn't turn right. I just cut the wheel to the left and I floored it. And I was going so fast that I missed the next road out of the valley and ended up hitting this S turn at like 70 miles an hour. And I don't know, by the grace of God, how we didn't wipe out and crash the car because I was going so fast through that S turn. And we made it through that and kept heading south and went all the way down, into the town of Peninsula and up, to hit the main road to double back and go back to Independence where we were staying at. It was probably a 10 to 15 mile detour
Yeah.
to loop around the way that we did instead of just turning right. you know, and the whole ride home is chaos. And that's when my buddy throws out, "Was that a Bigfoot? Was that a Bigfoot?" And the words like almost don't even register when somebody's asking you that because, we're 15 miles south of downtown Cleveland. What are you talking about? A freaking Bigfoot?
Yeah.
And I but I don't know what the hell else something like that could have been. And we get back to my house and everybody's kind of like losing our minds. And you know, we tell my mom, my stepdad, my sister, they're all still awake. And it's like that brief pause and then just laughing. And it's like, oh, you guys are messing with us, haha. Have you guys been out drinking? We're like, no, 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 nothing like that. And we're trying to explain what's happening. And I remember my stepdad, like, why don't you guys separate and draw pictures and bring the pictures back to me and let me see what you saw? And we did that. And
Wow.
we all drew pictures and we came back and all of us drew the same picture. We all drew the picture of something looking like this in the frickin' water. And that's what I drew too. And my cousin was losing his mind so bad. I was freaking out that I was like, I almost just got them killed because this was all my idea to go down there, right?
Yeah.
So I'm keeping quiet about that part. I mean, I know we were all standing there staring at this thing coming at us out of the water, and I keep it to myself about what I saw come out because nobody else had talked about it, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to start making. I'm like really worried about my cousin Ken, and I don't want him to be any worse off because I'm already thinking I'm going to be in deep shit for this anyway. So we all draw the picture of this thing in the water. My sister had these pictures for years, and I think just over the years of moving and her going to college, those pictures got lost, and I wish I still had them,
Yeah.
but I don't.
Yeah, that would be great.
But the next the very next morning, Ken's supposed to spend a couple of days with me, and my buddy he wanted to go home, so he went home. We didn't talk. Ken wants to go home. He lived about 45 minutes away, and I'm like, okay, I'll take you home. And on the way home, um, I've come to realize over the years that this part has been the toughest for me, dealing with it. I think it was a lot of the guilt and everything that I carried because, now having my own kids, I would have never done this to my own children, but I did it to my cousin. And I made my 15-year-old cousin swear to me that he wouldn't tell anybody what happened. Don't tell my aunt and uncle. Don't tell anybody. We're all going to keep quiet about this. And, he was an only child. And
Mm.
I sent him back home after everybody just having this encounter and losing their minds and then coming back and just getting laughed at for it. And I sent him back home and tell him shut up. And he did. He didn't say a word about it. And, so I kind of feel like I got that out of my hair. He's going to be okay. I'm making him promise that he's going to be okay. And he says he's going to be okay. And I get home and it's almost like even by that next day, like everybody's already like forgetting about it. Like they're not talking about it and I'm not talking about it much. Um, and it was that weird transition period where it's like I just had this crazy thing happen, but I've also got to be on a plane in 2 days and go back to Germany because I've been home for a month. And I'm having to get all my stuff together and people are wanting to see me. And there's so much stuff going on and plans to get back to the airport and everything like that I'm doing this. And it's kind of not on my mind the way that you would think it was because I'm like, I got to get all my affairs in order here. Well, that's kind of like when things hit. It was a delayed reaction. I had a 9-hour flight, back to Germany, and the flight's in the middle of the night, and it's quiet, and like that's when this all starts rushing back. Like the panic really started to set in when I was on that airplane going back to Germany, because more than anything, I got to talk to somebody about this. Like it's what just happened, and I want to talk to somebody about this. But the thing that's on my mind is what happened with that sergeant that I brought up that I haven't really talked about before.
Hmm.
And I know what had happened when things go awry in the military. I also know that as soon as I get back, I'm going to have to go for the drug test because that's standard protocol. Anytime you come back from leave, you got to go take that drug test. And that's exactly what happened. I showed up, my plane got back in on a Sunday. First thing Monday morning, I go and I got to take the P test.
Hmm.
And all I want to do is tell somebody about it, but I don't dare. I mean, I've got some fantastic friends in the Army, and I don't tell anybody. And the only thing I want to do is talk to my buddy. I don't want to talk to Ken because I don't want to bring this up. I want him to forget about it, but I want to talk to my buddy. And in 95, you don't text, you don't do anything like that. You don't have cell phones. I had a prepaid calling card and a payphone in the barracks. And I'd have to call him at like 11 o'clock at night. And I'd call him and he's like, I can't talk right now. And so I don't get to talk to him. And he's like, call me tomorrow. So I got to wait 24 hours. And here goes this cycle. The next day, I can't talk right now. The next day, I can't talk right now. Then it's just the answering machine. And I'm starting like, okay, after calling every day for like a week, I realize I'm like, I'm thinking like, he might be having a really tough time with this too. Something going on. I'm like, okay, he doesn't want to talk. I do, but I can't. I don't want to talk to Ken. So I bottled it up and I did my best to settle to shut it down. And and that was probably the time of my life. If I ever should have gone to some type of counseling, it should have been then. And I didn't because now things start messing. I told you how my military career was going and I was making rank really fast. And, I'm actually on orders at this time to go to Bosnia. And now everything starts messing with my head because I start realizing, I got nobody to talk to. I'm just thinking about this encounter. And the only thing I start thinking about, my brain starts, tricking me into believing that my military training failed me. Everything that I kind of built my ego upon was completely shattered. That, the react to an ambush, the everything, all that training that the military gave me failed and I ran. I didn't stand and fight. I didn't try to figure out what was going on. I didn't try to, you know, I didn't reach for a weapon. I didn't do anything. My brain and my body took over faster than anything, and it was true fight or flight, and it was flight, and I ran.
Hmm.
And it starts messing with my head that, what happens if I get deployed now? Will this happen again? If I get into a bad situation with people, if I'm supposed to be, with the sergeant major or something and I get into, something, am I going to run and leave him? And I start messing with my head this way. And, you know, I was coming up on reenlistment time and it really took him by surprise where after I, came home from leave, I kind of seemed a little bit different and distant and I didn't want to reenlist anymore. Prior to me going on leave, I had practically just maxed the oh God, I forget it was on the tip of my tongue, but the promotion board to go for my E5,
Hmm.
and I had a slot for PLDC, and that got canceled on me. And I just once it got canceled, all of a sudden, what was something I was striving for now became like this huge relief that I wasn't going to go and I just wanted to go home. And the only thing that was on my mind, I was just starting to obsess over it, is that I need to go home. I need to talk to my buddy. I'll figure things out. I'll join the National Guard. I'll join the reserves. I can still be part of the military, but maybe I'll do it on that scale and I'll get a job. I'm like, but I need to go home, and I can't go somewhere else. I can't keep dealing with this. I have to talk to him, and he won't talk to me. So
Wow.
A year goes by, and one of the things that I have been reflecting on over the past couple of days that I guess I never really realized is this is the point in my life where I really realized that I needed to be surrounded by crowds of people because when I was alone by myself with my thoughts, everything would trigger those memories of that night and it would almost be like an anxiety attack. But if I was with people and I was partying it and I was having some beers, I could make that go away and it was better and it was like living a normal life. But as soon as that stuff will go away, I started to realize like my what I always called like the cavalier adventurous spirit of the wilderness was completely gone. I wouldn't go out and do night hikes anymore. You know, if I was with my military unit, we were doing something, I could do it. But where I used to enjoy doing it by myself and calling owls, no, it was done. It got so bad for a while that I couldn't even just go hiking down in the valley or anywhere, you know, where you just want to go explore a new park.
Hmm.
I would have to do research and find those little like map things that are at the trailhead that show you you are here and this is out. And I had to recognize in my brain where out was. Because if I started to get in somewhere and I didn't know where I was, all of a sudden it's like everything would just start closing in, like it was getting claustrophobic. And I would have to turn around and leave, and I would just, you know, it would start to be like this irrational fear, like this panic attack, and I'm like, what the hell's happening? You know, and it was always like you know, I would get in, and all of a sudden my head's on a swivel, and I don't know what the hell's going on, and I just need to, okay, abort, we're out, and I would go back. So I I'm starting to deal with this, and this is just becoming my new me, my new life. And unbeknownst to me, every decision in my life is essentially being run through the filter of a Sasquatch encounter. Every decision I'm making
Wow.
is somehow being tied back to that because I can't see a body of water without having it trigger a memory. I can't see a train without having it trigger a memory. I can't think about my friends from school without it triggering what happened. You know, I can't think about my cousin without remembering what happened. And when people ask if you have like nightmares and things like that, it wasn't really like nightmares that would make you wake up screaming at night, but it was like being haunted by these thoughts every single day. And you know, here we are 30 years later, and you know, today it's better. I'm talking about it, but we'll get into this journey that, you know, for many years, you know, every bit of 10 to 12 years, I've said that there were less than a dozen people that ever heard this story from my own lips. You know, if they did hear about it, it was like secondhand, you know, and like I know my sister not truly making fun of me, but like, you know, haha, my brother's Bigfoot encounter, you know, and things like that, but not realizing how honestly scary and traumatic it was and how violent the encounter appeared. You know, we know now as a bluff charge. I didn't know that then. I didn't know what the hell this thing that comes charging at me through the water like a freight train. And I mean, that's not anything that anybody would imagine you're going to encounter when you're in a local park in the suburbs. So, you know, I get to the point where I'm going to be ETSing and coming home, and I don't tell my family anything. Nobody knows that I'm ETSing out of the Army and coming home to join the National Guard. I've already got my duty station set up in the National Guard at home. I've got all my paperwork, everything in order. Everything's ready to go for me to come home, except nobody at home knows that I'm on my way. And I fly into Cleveland. I take a taxi, end up at my house in Independence. I give my mother a heart attack. I open up that door, and it's exactly like you would imagine a surprise homecoming from your soldier's son. It's, oh my God, Joe's home. The hugs, the, you know, the happy tears, like, why didn't you tell us you were home? And like, oh my God, you know, they're so shocked, they're so surprised. We would have had this ready for you. I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm like, I hate to do this to you, but I have something that I need to do. And I told her, I'm like, I need to go see. my buddy. And she's like, you just got home. I'm like, I know. I'm like, but I've got something I got to do. My whole family, not a single person is thinking about that haha Bigfoot encounter from a year plus ago. That is the only thing that I am obsessing over is I need to go talk to him. And you got to remember, like best friends, he was free and clear to come walking into my house at will. And I was the same at his house. I mean, you were family more than you were friends, right?
Mhm.
And I showed up to his house unannounced and knocked on the door. And he opened the door and his eyes got that big. And he just said, I can't talk right now. And he closed the door in my face. And that was the last time I've physically seen him in 30 years. I had when that happened, I've never seen him again. And like I said, that was that was a best friend. And I was really, really worried about him. I wasn't mad at all. To this day, I'm still not. I got no hard feelings whatsoever because I know, you know, the trauma experience deals with people differently.
Mhm.
And I know, you know, Kenny would talk about it with me, but Kenny and I would talk about it very superficially because we went through it. So, it's kind of like, whenever we would see each other, I would never really reach out to him. But when we would see each other, it would always just be like, are you good? Like, that was a wild night, right? And just like, oh my God, that was freaking crazy. You never went through step by step by step the events of that evening. You had that emotional attachment and you knew,
Yeah.
and that's how me and Ken were. So for all those years, that's that's where we were. And my buddy, I let him be. I let him be, and he went his way, and I went my way, and just tried doing things, tried moving on, and there were little things in my life. I mentioned before that I was always a gearhead, and life goes on, right? I uh, I started my new career. I began an apprenticeship as a sheet metal worker. You know, we've got a long history of tin knockers in my family. I'm fifth generation. My son Cameron is now sixth generation sheet metal worker. I mean, we've got history of tinners in our family going back 100 years in Cleveland.
Wow.
Um, there's work from my family all over the state of Ohio, and so I'm getting started with my new career as a sheet metal worker apprentice. I'm in the National Guard, and the Army did get a hold of me and really give me a love for off-road driving, like with Jeeps and trail rides and things like that. And me and some friends, started a local off-road club in the Cleveland area that blew up and got really big for 10 to 12 years. That became our every weekend thing. We're always wrenching, always working on trucks, and it gave me an outlet to get out into the woods where I would semi feel safe. But some of my those were the closest friends that anybody could have, and none of them knew about my encounter. I didn't talk about it. And there might have been one or two times that it slipped, and every time it slipped, it's because you were I was partying and I had probably quite a few beers in me. And that's when the story would come out. It would never come out sober. And and any time that I told most people, it was usually like, okay, well, what
Moving
else you
on.
guys got going on? And
Wow.
you would try to get the story out, and you would try to tell people what would happen, and it's like, I know I told people, but it's almost like it wouldn't register, like nobody would hear. And I just, I went into every bit of, like I said, a 10 or 12 year time frame of being silent where I didn't talk about it, but every day it was there. And
Wow.
and that's that's the the basis of the 95 encounter.
Yeah. I think one thing I love so much about what you've shared, Joe, is that it so perfectly profiles the impact that seeing these beings can have on someone's life. I mean, it totally changed the trajectory of your life.
Yep. Yep. I
And
mean,
I
completely turned my path on a 180,
and
you
it's
know.
so understandable though that the reaction that you had, I mean that all of you had, made you question your ability to do your job as a soldier. I mean, that had to just destroy, I mean, that had to shatter what was in you that you thought that you knew about yourself. Uh, uh,
It was the ultimate kick to the ego. You know, I was really nervous to join the army to begin with because, like I said, I was never like the athletic type of dude that played football or anything like that. You know, for most people that knew me growing up, it's probably just like, oh, just Joe's gonna, maybe he'll go to college, maybe he'll do this. Like nobody probably really knew I was, other than my little group of friends, I mean, I had, lots of people I knew at school, obviously, but
yeah,
I don't think anybody really had me pegged as a military guy until I talked to the recruiter and I was just like, whoa, that seems something like I might want to try. And I did. And like everybody was like shocked that I joined the army. And then I was really nervous to join and, you know, thrilled that I fell in love with it,
yeah.
you know.
How did you put yourself back together? Like now that you know that this creature is out there 100%, how did you ever put that part of yourself back together so that you felt comfortable, taking your boys out and, that you would,
Well, it's, I guess I really started by, and it wasn't anything that I did consciously. It was all subconscious. And certain things would give me anxiety and 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 trigger me differently that did prior to the encounter. So prior to the encounter, a young guy loved all the slasher movies, loved all the war movies. We're watching, any war movie that's out there, Friday the 13th, Hellraiser, all those things, and all the gore and scary movies and everything like that. And all of a sudden, I can't watch them anymore. Like the sight of violence and suffering and things like that, like all of a sudden it was so weird because nothing physically happened to us, but it was the threat of that violence was so profound and so strong, the actual feeling that you were going to be torn to pieces. Like, I mean, if you could imagine just being charged by a grizzly bear and having that thing get like, so close to where, I mean, you
Mhm.
just think those claws are gonna tear your arm off, but it stops and walks away. I mean, that's gonna affect you and it's gonna affect the way that you see, animals and wildlife and things like that.
yeah,
And I
wow,
couldn't watch those movies anymore. And I would just naturally start gravitating away. And I would try to go back to my old self. And every time I would try to go back to my old self, it was like this feeling of dread, like waiting on bad news. I didn't want anything to do with Bigfoot, with ghosts, with anything like that, because the what I had seen wasn't supposed to exist. And I saw it with my own two eyes, and so did two other people. And the two other people that were with me were, in my mind, were having the same issues I was.
yeah,
But I,
yeah,
I couldn't talk to them to know any better. I didn't want to talk to them to know any better because talking to them, like I said, it's like the feeling of being in heavy financial debt where you're just in way over your head. The bills are coming, and every time you're just scared to open the mailbox to see what's coming, and it's just like you throw it on the table and like I'll deal with it tomorrow. And that's how everything just kept going. Like you're waiting on bad news from a doctor. Like there was always like that that feeling of dread if I would start thinking about those subjects.
Wow.
So I avoided those subjects and I went full steam ahead obsessively into the gearhead stuff, the off-road stuff, and I drove into that so hardcore
Hmm.
that I didn't allow myself the time to even think about those other things. And when I knew that I would be triggered and be thinking about those things, I at least always wanted to be surrounded by my buddies where, I always kind of felt like I had people around me and I
Wow.
would never do these things by myself.
Wow.
And those are the things that, your life becomes a new normal. I'm happy, I'm smiling, I'm going to work. It's not like I'm freaking out. It's like I was never like suicidal or anything like that. It was nothing like that,
Yeah.
but it was just such a profound change in your routine. And you just begin to live a new life without the things that used to be normal before.
What did you know about Sasquatch before this? Did you have some
Nothing. I
so
I knew what it was. I mean, I knew what it was. I had no idea if it was real or not. I guess I've always been the type of person that would tend to believe, yeah, why wouldn't it be real? So, I do remember, my buddy's mom, when we would go hiking down there in the valley, I do remember her bringing up one time about a newspaper article. This was probably back in either 90, 91, 92, that she came out with like the local Independence Gazette and like laughing because she said that there was people down in the valley looking for Bigfoot. And I remember us just like joking about that. And she's like, yeah, she's like, they think they build bird nests. She's like talking like that because well, here, I guess what they were talking about was, I think it's Eric Altman had discovered, what he was thinking was like these grass hut looking things near the Kenmore and Akron area.
wow.
But those were things that didn't even register at the time. She just kind of like came out with this thing and was like, she's like, you guys should watch the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. And I remember my buddy and my other friends watching it, but I wasn't there that night, so I had never even seen that movie. But I've heard of the legend of Bigfoot, but in my mind, that was always like, like the Yeti or the abominable snowman or
Right.
or something up in the Pacific Northwest or
Right.
something. It wasn't. I
Wasn't
had
here.
never heard of an account in Ohio.
Yeah. So as y'all are walking down that railroad track, that's the furthest thing from your mind.
It didn't even, it's what you don't know, you don't know.
Exactly.
I didn't even know that that was something that could have been there,
And even
let
the
alone have it on my mind.
and even the house that you guys heard, that didn't inform you. Like y'all was just like, well, what the heck is that?
Right. Yeah, there was no indicate, the Ohio howl. Um, it may have been recorded by then. I think Moneymaker mentioned that he might have done that in like 94 or 95, but we knew nothing about it. I mean, I was in Germany. That was, like I said, that was nothing that you would have seen on TV or anything back in the day.
No, no. I remember it being on the website, eventually, like the Ohio How. Wow.
Yeah,
So,
the only thing talked about down in the Cuyahoga Valley at that time that I remembered was always Helltown, 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 Helltown. And it was always the people making up stuff that people went and spray painted pentagrams and 666 and all this kind of stuff, and it was the satanic panic, and it was like cults. It was like
yeah,
that kind of stuff that people were talking about. It wasn't ghosts, it
wasn't
wasn't
that
spirits, it wasn't
right?
Bigfoots, it was people doing
Yeah,
cult stuff.
right. Well, you eventually must have shared your encounter with somebody. Was it with the BFRO or was it with a friend that told somebody you kind of?
So that's a very interesting story of how this happened. Um, because I did not tell anybody, and this story just grew legs and found a way to come out. So, the fantastic friend, I'll sit here and just keep talking smack on him because I love him, but Mark Mazel, who is a BFRO investigator, he worked with my mother. They worked at a hospital together, and he had worked with my mom for probably 20 years. And I had never met him. I didn't even know who he was, but In this time that we were doing the off-road stuff, I had built a truck for racing, like off-road racing, hitting the jumps and everything like that, right? I had just had my first son, Cameron. He was 5 weeks old, and I had a bad landing in that truck, and I broke my back. I had a burst
Oh,
fracture of T7 vertebrae, and I was off work for like 7 weeks. And while I was home with my brand new 5 week baby,
oh
and now I'm
gosh.
unemployed with a broken back, I'm sitting at home and my phone rings, and it's my mom, and I think my mom's calling to tell me, just check up on me and see how I'm feeling and everything like that. And she starts off the conversation with, "Do you remember your Bigfoot encounter?" And I'm like, huh, "Yeah, like every day of my life I remember it. Why?" And she's like, "I'm working with a guy who says that he's investigating these things and he wants to hear your story." She's like, "Do you want to give him a call?" And I'm like, "I don't care." So she gives me a cell number and I give him a call. And we go through the whole interview process on the phone. And this was sometime in August of 2005. So it was 10 years after the encounter had happened. And I tell him the story, and he wants me to, put it down on the BFRO's website. Well, in 2005, remember, I'm a tin knocker, I'm a construction worker, I'm building mud bogger trucks. I'm not playing on the internet. I don't trust computers. I don't like even having a cell phone with me. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'll do it. And I blow him off and I don't do it. You know, well, unbeknownst to me, in this next following year, Mark, being the great investigator that he is, gets in touch with my cousin and talks to my cousin. My cousin doesn't tell me. Gets in touch with my buddy, talks to him, gets the story from him, doesn't tell me.
Wow.
Mark, out of the blue, a year later, in like September of 2006, calls me back and he's like, "Hey, remember me?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You want to tell me your story again?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I told him the story again, and we had never met face to face. This is all just over the phone. Told him the story, and he's like, "Why don't you put it down on the website for me? It would really help me out." I'm like, okay. I don't trust anything with Bigfoot. I don't know if the government's spying on me. I don't know anything about it. So my BFRO recount is like as lame and plain as you can get, because I'm like, whatever, screw this computer, I'm gonna do it. And I put out this report, and that was it. And then I shut it off again. So I do that report in 2006. 2 years later, in 2008, my son Nathan is born. Now, a little bit of family history. Ever since growing up, since I was just a little guy in diapers myself, my family one half of the family would go to Tappan Lake for a week in the summer. Another half of the family would go to Salt Fork for a week in the summer, and we would rent a cabin. My grandpa had a fishing boat. So, my whole life, it had been a family tradition to either go to Tappan Lake or Salt Fork. Um, both of them for fishing, and I hate fishing. I just like riding. I ride the boat, listen to my Walkman, and everybody else would fish. I'd eat the fish, but I hated fishing. But I liked camping and going out in the woods and all this. So my wife and I decide, we're going to carry on this family tradition. And we had gone to Tappan Lake, and this particular time we had gone to Salt Fork and decided to stay in the lodge. I don't know anything about Salt Fork's history at all with Sasquatch in 2008. Absolutely nothing. And this was probably very early 2009, probably January or so of 2009. Nathan was still in a little pack and play. I mean, not even walking yet. So me and my wife and my two little kids, we go and just spend a weekend at the lodge at Salt Fork, and we're checking out in the main lobby there of Salt Fork. We're checking out, and this guy catches my eye because he's wearing this jacket that is just so out of place. It looks like one of those Canadian, um, outdoor jackets. That's like the blue with the reflective, not something that we everybody around here wears yellow. So he's wearing this blue jacket with the reflective, and it says "Blue Tracker Bigfoot Investigator" on the back of his jacket. And I don't know why it pissed me off. It like made me
Really?
really mad to see this guy wearing this jacket because I've got like a I'm very defensive about this subject after so many years of getting laughed at. And like, I'm just like, I hate to say it, but like the dick side of me came up like, who the hell is this guy wearing a freaking Bigfoot jacket? And I tell my wife, I'm like, please finish checking out. I'm gonna go talk to this guy. And I go out and I in the confront him in the parking lot. And I'm like, hey, I'm like, what's up with the Bigfoot jacket? And ended up as, Blue Tracker, Dave Nokowski, he'd be happy to hear this, ended up being one of the nicest guys you could ever meet. And he gave me a rundown of the Bigfoot history of Salt Fork. And I about lost it while we were standing there in the parking lot because he starts telling me about the conference that they have. And I'm like, I didn't know about any conference. What are you talking about? There's people that investigate the stuff here. I'm like, there's Bigfoot here. And I'm sitting there thinking in my head, I know there's some in the Cuyahoga Valley. Or I didn't know there's anything here. And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, there's this whole big conference. He's like, it's coming up, and I think it was April. And I go back and I tell my wife, I'm like, let's book a weekend. I want to come here for a conference. And this is like the first time in my life where I start thinking, I need to get ahead of this. And my wife is just like, okay, whatever. I had told her the story before, and she kind of never knew what to make of it. She's always believed that I believe something happened, but how can you expect somebody to just jump
Right.
in and be like, "Oh my God, I believe you." Even my own wife isn't like that. But she's like, if this is something that you want to do, because I didn't even really talk about it with her. I brought it up to her one time, maybe twice, and now it's like I want to come here for a conference. And she's like, whatever. She's like, you can come to your conference. Me and the boys will swim and we'll go do this and we'll go do that. So we come back for the conference, and I this ended up being a pattern for several years. I was so excited to go to this conference and finally learn about what I had seen down in that valley.
Hmm.
And I went to every speaker, and I didn't tell a single person. It really freaked me out to talk about my own encounter. But I was just a fly on the wall, and I was listening so intently to everything. And the more speakers I sat in, I listened to, it was interesting, and they're talking about their footprints and this and that and the other thing. And I'm kind of like, come on, come on, get to the good stuff. Where's like the witnesses? Where's the people talking about? And there was like none of that. And I remember like leaving the conference, like, well, that was kind of a letdown. I mean, they're just talking about an animal. I'm like, this was, I mean, I get it. It was like flesh and blood what came out, but like nobody was talking about anything scary. People were talking about, these things playing peekaboo
Right.
and selling their t-shirts and having some stickers and oh, here's this guy who's selling a book. And there's these two dudes running around wanting to interview people. And they're asking anybody in the audience, has anybody had an encounter? We want to interview you for our TV show. And I'm just quiet. I'm not saying nothing. And I just like kind of left like, well, I didn't get out of that what I thought I was going to, but I met a few people and it was cool. Come back the next year, and it was the same thing. Come back the next year, so now you're probably talking 9, 10, probably about 2011. And I think 2011, after going to the conference for 2 years now, essentially by myself, I think I finally meet Mark in person, you know, and he kind of starts taking me under his wing a little bit and like, hey, he's like, are you comfortable telling your story to this guy? I don't know any of these people he's introducing me to.
Hmm.
And I'm starting to tell the story, and and everybody's like very interested in it. But every single person that I tell the story is just like, huh. never heard of an encounter quite like that. And it really almost started to get depressing, I guess you could say, because I started to realize after, after all these years of keeping it quiet, now I'm at least starting to talk about it with Mark and with Mark only. If Mark was with me, I would talk. If Mark wasn't with me, you'd be hard pressed to get me to say anything about it whatsoever. I wanted to listen, I didn't want to talk. And it just I started to equate this and I called it, and it's funny because my thing where I start documenting all the encounters that are happening now, I call it the hot tub effect. And the reason why I called it that was because it's like getting into a hot tub. You're so excited and you're like, this is going to be so good. And you slip into it and it's so warm. But the longer you stay, the hotter it gets and the more uncomfortable it gets and the more it starts to burn. And before you know it, you start like freaking out, like, I got to get out of this thing. And that's how
Mm,
going to those conferences felt from the day I showed up to the day I left. It felt like the weekend was one long stay in the hot tub for too long. And I would come home from these conferences, and for like 2 weeks, I would feel like I'm just like mentally drained. Um,
wow.
which brings me to 2013, and this is probably one that a lot of people know who were there. Finding Bigfoot came for the second time in Ohio, and I didn't go the first time they went to Jurassic. I said I was going to go, and then I didn't show up. They came back a second time. It was in East Canton, and I had some friends that I had made now in the Sasquatch community. Like, come on, you got to go. I'm like, I'm not going on TV, and they're like, you don't have to. They're like, just come and sit in the audience. I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm brutally honest with you when I tell you this. They they got me into that building. Everybody had to sign a waiver to sit down inside. I'm sitting next to my friend Sonia, and she's like, she's like, I really think you should tell your encounter. I think these guys would like it. I'm like, I don't want it to be on TV. And she's just like, you can tell them afterwards that you don't want it to be on TV, but I think they need to hear it. And she was very nice and very, very supportive. And I'm like, okay. So when the time comes, they're like, does anybody have, encounters, and raise their hand? I raised my hand along with like 30 other people in the room. I mean, it was a huge room and it was a lot of people that had encounters. And all these people are telling their stories. They're telling their stories. They're telling their stories. They finally get to when it's my turn, and I stand up to tell the story. And I guess I had never really realized it, but other than the first night that it happened, this was the first time that I ever told the story stone cold sober. And I had never slipped into a flashback that bad. Um, it was the most terrifying I had ever felt recounting that story up until that time, and that was in 2013. And it was so bad. I remember by the time we were done, my throat was so dry I could barely even take a sip of the water. My water bottle was shaking. Sonia's like scratching my back because I was visibly like shaking as I was telling the story because the energy in that room was so high. And the emotions of the people that were in there were so high that flipped me back into that flashback of that night to where I honestly thought I had done myself some sort of psychological damage when I left from that because I could not shake the anxiety for 2 weeks.
Wow.
It was so bad that I was starting to tell people at work, like, hey, would you think I'm crazy if I told you I saw like a Bigfoot encounter, just to like kind of gauge the interest. I had some people I really trusted at work, and it ended up being the same thing. I tell them about it, and next thing you know, it's just ball busting and jokes and everything like that. I was like trying to like honestly be serious. I was like trying to like reach out and like talk to people, but nobody's hearing what I'm saying.
Mm,
And I
wow.
was just like, you would think that after you recount something like that, that it would go away. and it wasn't. I mean, I felt like I was hungover for like 2 weeks. Like it just this total like drained. Is like, is this feeling ever going to go away? And eventually, it finally did. But it took a long time for that to go away.
Wow.
And yeah, so that brings us to 2014. And 2014 is when the wheels start falling off this bus. So I am perfectly willing and able to keep picking away at this journey, but I can start telling you some things that are happening, maybe one or two stories of things that start happening with my family. Um, so this was probably about March of 2024, 2014. My son is 8 years old, and my boys are not into the cryptid stuff at all. They're little kids. They were 8 and 5 at the time, and they are knee deep into trains and trucks and tractor pulling, and they are little gearheads like me. You know, Cameron's the one that's into sports more than anybody. He loves basketball and he loves to play basketball. But everything with them has always been, we were talking offline before we started recording, they're the boys they never play video games. They don't watch movies. They're always outside playing. If they did watch TV, they were watching Bob the Builder and Thomas the Train, or they're watching videos of tractor pulls and racing and and doing these kinds of things and going out and being in the mud and climbing trees. Like they're living like the rural country kid lifestyle here where we live. And the other thing, I'm sure there's many women out there who are moms that understand what I'm going to say. The moms are always nurturing to the kids. When a kid has a bad dream, when a kid has something happen at night, if they don't feel good, if for whatever reason, everybody learns quick, you don't wake up dad. Dad's the grumpy bear that just yells at you and tells you, go back to sleep. We're going to deal with it in the morning. I got to get up for work in the morning. I don't care that your toe hurts. You're not, you wake somebody up in the middle of the night and they're like that. So what do? They go to mom. Well, this particular night, we where everybody's asleep. It's the middle of the night, and I feel this little hand touch me on the shoulder and shake, and I just hear, "Dad, Dad." He's like waking me up, and the weirdest thing happened because I felt like I had just been slipped into a warm comforter that had just come out of the dryer, and you just wrapped this warmth around you, and it was like the most tight, like cozy, like warm feeling of like calm that had just washed over from head to my feet. And it was like, what's going on, bud? What's happening? Did not react my knee-jerk reaction of what? It wasn't like that at all. It was a physical, like warm, embracing feeling of something that came over me and was like, what? And he's telling me, he's like, something really weird just happened to me. And he's crying. And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, I was just locked out in the garage. And I'm like, what do you mean you were locked out in the garage? And he's like, there were 5 blue people in my bedroom.
Oh my
And I'm like, what? And he's like, there were 5 blue people in my bedroom. I'm like, what? I'm like, so now I'm like kind of like getting up and alert. Like, wait a second, what the hell's going on? What are you talking about? There were 5 blue people in your bedroom. And he said he was laying there asleep. He's like, and something made him open his eyes. And he's like, there were 5 people. He's like, their skin was like this glowing blue color that looked like it was like kind of like lumpy or bumpy. He never really described it as scaly, but he said it was like a lumpy or bumpy kind of texture. And he said that they were smiling at him. And he said that while he was like laying there, he couldn't move, and these 5 people are smiling at him. And he said all 5 of them put their hands on him. He's like, and the next thing he knew, he was out in the garage, and he was locked out in the garage. We've got an attached garage to our house. And he said that he went from being in his bed to having these 5 blue people around his bed. And then he was out in the garage and he didn't know how he got out there. And he said that he was pounding on the garage door because we lock it and deadbolt it, and he was pounding on it and he was crying and he's out there in his bare feet. And at the time he told me he was like out in the garage, I grabbed his hands and his hands were ice cold. And I'm like, how did you get in here? And he's like, one of the people came back and opened up the door. So now I'm like, all right, hold on. So what the hell's going on here now? So I get up out of bed and I start walking around and I go over and the garage door is unlocked, and I relock it again. I know, my wife is OCD about locking that door. I know it was locked
Wow.
prior to going to bed. So I relock the door. I walk through the house. There's nothing there. Nothing seems off. And I'm like, are you okay to go back to bed? We can talk this tomorrow. He's like, yeah, I'm fine. So he goes back to bed and I wake up that next morning and I can't get that out of my mind. And I'm just like, I'm like, a couple things are going through my mind. First of all, I'm like, what the hell was that all about? I don't know anything about, never once ever in my life have heard anything about blue skinned people. What the hell are you talking about? How did they get into the house? What's going on? But something was eating at me, telling me that I know my family's involved with this somehow. And it all looped back to the Sasquatch encounter. And that's the only thing I could think of. I'm like, I don't know how it's tied in with the encounter. I don't know what the connection is. I don't know what the hell happened. I'm like, but maybe it's okay for me to at least talk to Cameron about this and let him know what happened. So, and you got to, up until this point, my boys and my family had gone to the Bigfoot conference with me, but
Hmm.
they were never with me when I told my story. They didn't know I had an encounter because I didn't talk about it. They were just, they'd be running around the hotel in their little fuzzy Bigfoot feet, and Bob Gimlin's picking them up and taking pictures with them. And, everybody was so nice and they owned that place and they would just run around and they were the little kids at the conference, not knowing that dad had this encounter and that's why he's there.
Wow.
So I tell him about it because a few days later, I'm trying to process this. I get another out of the blue phone call from Mark Mazel. And Mark tells me that coming up, like I said, I think this happened in March of 2014, because he said in April, coming up in a couple of weeks, he's going to be doing a camp out at Salt Fork. And he wanted to invite me to be a part of it. And he also said that he was going to be a presenter at the conference in, late April, early May, and wanted to know that if he called on me, would I get up and tell my story? So I'm trying to push myself out of my shell, right? And I agree, and I say yes. It ended up not happening that way. I didn't have to tell it, which I was relieved, but I told him I would.
Wow.
But he wanted me
That
to.
takes a lot of courage. That takes a
It,
lot of courage, Joe.
I was trying to heal from this, and I always kind of like felt that healing from it was going to be facing it head on,
Yeah.
get back on that horse.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what the hell I was dealing with. But I agreed to go on this camp out. But I had a lot of anxiety with the camp out. And Mark was super cool again. And he's like, he knew of my military background and everything, and he's got the FLIR. And he's like, what I would like to do is a couple of pre-hikes with you just down in the valley on the towpath. He's like, we can just go as far or as short as you want. He's like, but I want you to get comfortable with the FLIR because I want you to operate the FLIR when we're out there at Salt Fork. He's like, he's like, I'll make sure wherever we go, you're always with me. We always know a way out. He's like, I'm going to make sure you're good with all that before we go. And he was true to his word, and everything was good. And we went down to the towpath. I'm learning how to use his FLIR, which was very similar to the night vision goggles that I had done. So it was a very easy transition for me to use.
Hmm.
And his FLIR, um, very expensive FLIR for the time, showed in black and white, where white was hot, black was dark, and it sees what you see.
Right.
right? It doesn't record, it doesn't take pictures, it doesn't do any of that. It's just an ocular device that you're looking through and it sees what you see. And there's probably about a dozen of us that go to Salt Fork camping that weekend. Um, the Saturday we do a pre-hike for the scouting out a place for the advanced hike for the conference coming up. And we are in Coshocton, and me and like Alan McGargle, a couple of these other guys were put together, and we get lost. And I am losing my freaking
Oh
mind
no.
because nobody knows, these guys don't care. They're just like, oh, this trail will take us somewhere. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, yeah, to our death. And we've because they were looking for a path to take, and everybody went their own way. I've never been there before. It was way out of my comfort zone. I did not like it. And when I caught in the distance where Mark's Jeep was, I was like gone. And I was like, meet everybody back at the car. It's what I always did when I would get uncomfortable. There's my escape route. I'm out. So I'm calmed down and we're doing our night hike. And Mark has this thing where, he was basically trying to set up like a perimeter, almost like with hunting, where you would put people in a circle and bring everything together. And if anything's within that circle, you bring it together. And nothing happened. We're out there and it was a very essentially uneventful hike. It was very well planned out. Everybody was in groups, everybody had walkie-talkies. All the walkie-talkies, the batteries were fresh, the batteries were changed. Everybody knew where everybody was, everybody had a reason to be where they were. And everything went off without a hitch until we get to the huddle point and we're ready to go. And Mark's, maybe 25, 30 feet away from me, and I'm standing next to this guy from Michigan who I always apologize, I don't remember his name, but he's physically larger than me. I'm 6'1", 245 pounds. This guy was probably 6'6" and 280. So physically much larger than I was. Not like he was like tall, stronger looking dude. And he and I are standing side by side, and we're talking now, like the event is over, and we're just out in the woods talking. And I feel like a bat or a moth or a hummingbird or something tries to fly into my ear. I'm standing 2 feet away from this guy, like practically shoulder to shoulder, and I feel like this. It feels like the soft wings of a very large moth just go like this, like hitting me in the side of the head. And it freaked me out because it was so cold and it was drizzling that I started doing one of these things. I'm smacking the side of my head. Well, Mark sees me, and Mark is like, Joe, what's going on? And I'm like, I feel like a bat or a moth or something just trying to fly into my ear. And he's like, pull out the FLIR. And I'm like, what? Okay. And I pull out the FLIR and I start doing a 360-degree perimeter.
Hmm.
And as soon as I got to, I guess from the direction I was standing, what would have been like my 5 o'clock position, I turn around and not 20 feet away from me is this glowing object on the ground that was probably about the size of a very large pumpkin or maybe like two or three basketballs together. The hottest heat signature I had seen on that FLIR the entire weekend. And I'm even talking about like glancing, looking at the fire.
Hmm.
And this was white, white, white hot. And the FLIR froze on that image and like locked up. And Mark comes running over and he's grabbing the FLIR like it's lanyarded around my neck. And he goes tromping like a madman straight at whatever this thing is. And he's kicking around in the bushes and he goes like running into that area where this thing was. And he's kicking around and he's just like, "Fuck, fuck." And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And he comes back. And now I'm starting to freak a little bit because I'm looking and his FLIR is locked up. And we're both looking at this image on the FLIR, and his battery indicator is going from full bars to zero, full zero, full zero. It's like a windshield wiper. That's the only movement on this thing is the battery going back, forth, back, forth, back, forth.
Wow.
And none of us had the wherewithal to pull out a cell phone and take a picture of the screen. He just turns it off and turns it on again, and it starts working. So we're like, what the hell was going on with that? And he's like, I don't know. Well, he goes to use his walkie-talkie, and it's nothing but static. And everybody that's around us, none of our walkie-talkies are working. They've all got power, but none of them are transmitting. They're just static. They're static. There's nothing going on. It's just static. So we have a very interesting conversation back to the car because now my brain is racing, right? And I want to know why I'm here. And and I started asking him, I'm like, what the hell do you think just happened? He's like, what do you know about zapping? And I'm like, I've never even heard of it. I'm like, what are you talking about zapping? He's like, well, he's like, I don't know if you were zapped or not. He's like, but there's a theory out there that people think that Sasquatches can use infrasound. He's like, but it's very curious to me why you got hit with infrasound, if in fact that's what it was. And I'm like, why? What's curious? He's like, well, he's like, what we've been talking about and surmising is essentially that if somebody gets zapped, that's who the alpha male or whatever perceives to be the biggest threat. Generally speaking, that's the largest person in the group. He's like, you were standing next to the largest guy in the group, and he had zero effect. He's like, whatever it was targeted you,
Mm-hmm.
not him.
Right.
I'm like, okay. So now I'm quiet now, and we're walking, and I don't know where this question came from. I just ask him, I'm like, look, I'm like, you've obviously heard people say that dogs can smell fear or bees can smell fear. I'm like, do you think that there's any truth to that? Like there's some sort of an aura or something that people give off that Bigfoots might be able to pick up on. And he looks at me and he's like, everybody who's here is here for a reason. And I look at him and I'm like, like I said, we're friends. And I'm like, did you bring me here as bait? And he like laughs and he's like, everybody's here for a reason. And I'm like, you motherfucker. So like we're like laughing, like it was a very lighthearted thing, it was kind of funny. And when but truthfully, I didn't put two and two together. I mean, he had psychics, he had people that were sensitive, he had all these different people, he had women together, he had soldiers, he had computer geeks, everybody was
Yeah.
there was something different, and they
Some
all brought something different to the table. We get back to the campground, and the second half of the group shows up, and they're kind of irate because they want to know why we left them out in the woods while they were screaming for us. And that kind of like left us a little bit perplexed because we're like, what are you talking about? You were screaming for us. When we had all come together, it was just a little pond between us. So everybody, even the people on the other side of the pond, even though we couldn't see them, they were probably less than a quarter of a mile away. If you were screaming for us, we would have heard you. And they said that something was over on the other side, started splashing around through the water, started throwing like rocks and boulders. One of the guys was like trying to be like very loud and aggressive and like, wah, wah, like trying to scare like whatever was around. Like they didn't know what was going on. They're trying to reach us on the radio, and they're like, none of our radios are working. We
Mm.
got all this activity starting to happen over here. You guys aren't answering. Next thing we see is just headlights leaving the hill, just leaving us out here.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that was a very interesting evening. And
Wow.
yeah, so that I laughed and I told Mark, I'm like, you're going on, I mean, what is this now? Like 19 years since I have had my encounter in 95. So from 95 to 2014 was almost 19 years there.
Wow.
I'm like, and you bring me out into the woods for the very first time in a situation like this, and this happens. And
Yeah.
not only that, you guys always like to talk about your breeding populations and your flesh and blood, this and that and the other thing. But woo happens, allegedly, with the BFRO. What do you make about that? And he's like, it's documented, and that's about all he would ever tell you. He's like, we keep track of it.
Yeah.
So that was yeah, second time out that happens. And
That's awesome. Well, I I want to bring you back on
okay,
to talk about all of the other stuff because there's a lot of stuff that you've
there is a
uncovered.
lot.
Yeah, yeah,
There is a lot, and
yeah.
just keep that story with Cameron in the back of your head because boy, it starts playing off of that side of things,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
just and a tangled web of everything in between. You know, very, very, very interesting
Well, I I
where things started to take off from.
oh, I can't wait to hear more about it. And thank you so much for sharing. I mean, you know, it's amazing, and I know a lot of time has passed that you can tell your story, and it doesn't. Thank God it doesn't impact you the way it did. You know
Right, right.
that time when you stood up and you shared. Thank God that you're past that, and I
Yeah,
you know
yeah, we're all
the
good now.
the courage that you know, I think that's just the thing people don't realize how much courage it takes to talk about these things and about the other stuff, the 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 paranormal. And I don't really think it's paranormal. I think it's probably natural. It's just our sciences have not caught up to the true reality that
Exactly. It's natural. It's just supernatural. It's beyond our thought process and our physics and our way of thinking yet.
right,
But
right.
it happens and it's real.
Yeah. Well,
You know.
I'm looking forward to our next part two, where you can talk about, you kind of catch us up with what's been happening with you and your family.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. Just thank you so much for choosing sketching
Anytime.
encounters to share.
I'm looking forward to part two.
Me too. All
So,
right, Joe. Thank
all
you.
right. Thank you so much.
Okay.